Welcome to Competitive CX, the podcast for financial services professionals tackling client experience challenges. If you're passionate about enhancing client experience and driving client satisfaction, you found your new favorite show.
I'm Adam Grainger, and alongside Melanie Aimer and Hamish Taylor, we delve into essential CX strategies and innovations that are shaping the future of client experience in finance.
With our diverse backgrounds in customer experience and financial services, we're going to bring you some real-world insights and thought-provoking discussions to help you navigate the complexities of delivering exceptional client experiences.
Whether you're a decision maker, a marketer, or anyone in a client-facing role in financial services, you'll find valuable takeaways to elevate your organizational CX strategies.
So come on then, subscribe now and join us in transforming client experience and gaining that competitive edge.
Let's dive in. Good morning, afternoon, or evening to wherever you are. Welcome to our podcast series called Competitive CX. In our last episode, we discussed what is CX and who should own it. It was quite lively. Today, we're going to discuss cultures that kick CX down the road. Now, you might have, if you've joined us for previous episodes, you might start to recognize our voices. My name is Melanie Aimer, and for the last 20 years, I've been championing the role of client experience within the different areas of financial services, from capital markets, asset management, private banking, and wealth management. And you would have heard me say before, I'm absolutely not satisfied that in financial services, we're really cracking the challenges of creating great and exceptional client experiences. Now, you would have heard these two voices if you've dialed in before, who are joining us today to look at new approaches, and they are very experienced innovators already making a huge impact in the financial services industry. Firstly, Hamish Taylor, welcome.
Hi, Melanie. Good to see you again.
Hi, Hamish. And I understand you're an award-winning former CEO whose world-leading customer-led transformation approach has inspired hundreds of companies across 48 countries to rethink their customer approach. You've also been dubbed the master thief for his track record of transferring ideas from one sector to another. And there's no doubt we're going to hear the master thief today.
Financial services is boring, Melanie. I'll bring you something from toilet cleaning, far more interesting.
I'm going to hold tight onto my wallet.
Welcome, Adam. Welcome. You're heading up Accomplish, and that you've pioneered the measurement and understanding of the key drivers of a great client experience. And that you've enabled asset management organizations to really find ways where they can out or underperform on CX.
Pinpoint. That's
Pinpoint, exactly that. And I'll be asking you to bring your thinking to the wider financial services community. And today we're going to be tackling the challenges of client experience in financial services. And if you're listening to us today, we welcome your views and thoughts. And do please reach out to us either directly or leave us a comment. And if you're listening, we'd like to ask you a favor, and that is to rate and review this episode. We really do want to hear from you. And we do hope you enjoy the podcast series. So today we're going to discuss and cover cultures that kick CX down the road. Hamish, Adam, who wants to start?
Hamish, would you like the honor?
I'm very happy to go first this time. Yes, absolutely. So, does culture kick CX down the road? Absolutely. I mean, without the right culture, there's no quality customer experience. That goes without saying. So what I'm going to share with you, I guess, in the opener here today is my 4 pennyth on it. Well, actually, to be honest, I've really gone to town on this one. So I've actually got 6 learnings I'm going to share with you. So that kind of six pennyth or something like that anyway. But I'll go through them very quickly. I'll go
Get
through
your pens and papers out, everybody.
Yeah, rapid fire, six things about it. Right. First of all, it's really important, the learning from British Airways, prioritize culture change before you kick off your CX initiatives. That's one way of getting around it. The culture will get in the way. So at BA, they had the whole putting people first programs. They ran for a couple of years before idiots like me turned up to put beds in airplanes and things like that. But I got the reception there because the culture had already gone first. So culture comes before initiatives for me when you really wanted to drive CX. Number 2, get everyone in it. It just takes one team, one function to be out of line to scupper the whole customer experience. And we touched on this a bit last time. You know, the operations people moving aircraft around Heathrow Airport actually can have a big impact if they move it to somewhere where you've got to have buses or something. You know, then all of a sudden you impacted on the customer experience. They may have done the right thing for efficiency of aircraft movement, but it was the wrong thing for the customers if they don't understand the customer's perspective. And I had the same thing with Eurostar, with things like ski trains and things like that, where people would make the right decisions for their function, but didn't realize why it was not the right thing for CX. So get everyone involved in this culture about what we need to do with CX. Number 3, involve early. One of the biggest mistakes we made when we were doing relaunches in BA was if we got people like the cabin crew involved at the end of the process rather than the beginning. Yes, they may not interact with the customer to the end of a process, but they need to have a vote right at the very beginning. It's a bit like, again, to take an idea from an analogy of some work I did with Microsoft, think of a relay baton changeover in a 4x100 meter sprint relay, okay? The baton changeover is actually designed not, yes, to make this changeover efficient, but the way you hand over the baton is actually designed for the next changeover. You take the baton in such a way to make sure that when you hand over to the next person, you're holding onto the back of it to make it easier to hand over. And what it says is actually, therefore, you need to think about the next part of the chain when you're designing what you do. And Mike, you should do that by bringing everybody in early. That's the first 3. Number 4, and this is the biggie for me, recruit for culture fit, not for skills or CX experience. Recruit people to champion this who not only care about CX, but also can operate in your cultural environment. I failed miserably at times in BA brand management recruitment because I thought to myself, I'll recruit brand managers that have worked at Mars or Unilever or places like that know brand management, wrong criteria. Because what they actually, because in places like Mars or Unilever or P&G, the brand manager is line management. The business is set up around the brand manager, not in BA. They need to be able to fit into a culture where it's about influencing an organization that doesn't immediately think that you are in charge, you are in control, and you've got to be able to work in that culture. So I would always operate, go for culture first in terms of my recruitment. Number 5, once you're in there, do not clash with the culture. Again, another example from sport. How in martial arts, they talk about, like, if you want to defend yourself in karate or judo, you use the other person's energy, you deflect it. You don't try and block them, you use their energy. Yeah. To me, it's exactly the same thing here. As an outsider going into BA or Eurostar or Sainsbury's, what you have to do is actually credit the culture that's already there. They're a successful organization and you use it to your advantage. You don't confront it. If you confront it and tell them they're wrong, you're going to fail. What you've got to do is find ways of using what they do already and helping redirect it in the direction that you want to go. And then number 6, link to physical. And I think this is something that Adam's probably going to pick up on as well, which is linked to physical specific KPIs for that department you're dealing with. You're very rarely going to run into people around the organization that don't want to serve customers. But if they can't see the benefit to themselves of doing it, they're not going to do it. So measures and rewards are going to determine culture. I mean, there's no way you can turn around a culture towards CX unless CX is in everybody's KPIs and rewards, etc. Too many people try to establish a culture of CX by persuading everybody it's a jolly good idea to be nice to customers. Doesn't work. It's not enough. If the language of the business is hard,
put it over within our strategic pitch. It's a pillar of our strategy. Okay, we've done it now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the point about it is, if the language of the business is hard numbers, find some hard numbers to support your case. And by that I don't mean general numbers like there's lots of evidence to show that prioritizing CX will drive profitability. No, they need specific, relevant numbers to me in my job. Here's why putting the customer at the center will drive my specific numbers in my department.
Yeah.
Now, in future sessions, I know we'll look at things like the tools and creating the customer promise and all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to culture and getting the culture bit right, why cultures get in the way, that's my things. Culture before initiatives, get to everyone, involve early, recruit for culture fit and not brand management or CX skills, redirect the energy, don't confront it, and link it to specific measurable KPIs where you can. So there you go. That's the whistle-stop tour of my 6 tips.
Wise counsel. Adam?
Well, Hamish, I absolutely love that. And I'm really looking forward to the debate bit of our podcast just now. But, support all of that. Interestingly, though, I looked at our episode title differently. So I was thinking what cultures might kick CX down the road and might sort of deprioritize it. So here are my thoughts on that situation, which I suspect a number of our listeners, may find themselves in a situation like that. So I think similar to a number of the points that you made, I don't believe we can discuss the topic around culture without acknowledging that leadership drives culture. In my opinion, this is because leaders have the power to change the other factors that influence culture. You mentioned hiring, but also incentives and ways of working. A leader can change those, and employees will follow leaders.
Yep.
And they will do that. They'll do that for their career advancement or to stay out of trouble, or because it's the leaders who define the priorities. So employees then, in my experience, will absorb and mirror the leaders' behaviors, and that will then shape the culture around them. And
Absolutely.
I think it's really interesting then to hear your first point, which is, to prioritize the culture first to make sure that it is ready for, for a CX initiative. But because of all of that, that's why I believe the senior leaders hold the greatest cultural influence over an organization. If the CEO goes the extra mile for clients, then on average, the organization will do too. An example I would look at in financial services is Monzo. If you're not familiar with it, it's a challenger bank, and it's built its entire CX model around transparency. So, when there's an issue, when a crisis hits, they immediately keep customers informed in real time. And that's sort of strikingly in contrast to some other firms, I'm going to mention one in a moment, that have been caught burying mistakes.
I think just on that point, Adam, one thought is I did some work together with Melanie a year or two ago with a bank where she was working, and picking up on your leadership point, when we looked at what needed to happen or what needed to change culturally or whatever, the first place Melanie went was her chief executive.
Yes.
That's the first person, that was the first person she introduced me to. And we knew that if it was a he at this time, if he didn't get it and didn't want to champion it, let's go home. Let's give up now.
Yeah.
We'll all reflect the behavior of the person above us, the person who, keeps us out of trouble and advances our career, and directs our priorities. Absolutely. So the next thought I had when I was doing my preparation for our session just now is...
Blimey, I didn't think about that.
He's falling off his chair.
No, I was just thinking that I better go and do homework next time then.
Well, actually, no. If you're getting away without doing it, then you're doing a great job. Just keep being the master thief. So I was thinking, well, why might a leader then kick CX down the road? Why might they deprioritize it? So here are my thoughts on that. Well, first, if you find yourself under the leadership of someone who doesn't want to prioritize clients, then you've got some difficult choices to make.
So true.
But they're a minority, right?
Yeah, sure.
Most leaders are not like that. So let's not focus on our time there. Let's use our time profitably just now and focus on the majority. Hamish, as you were saying, most people want to do well by clients. So why might a leader deprioritize CX? When it might seem counterproductive. Well, it might be that cost cutting, efficiency, or sales are just more urgent, even if they only intend a deprioritization of CX and client experience to be just temporary. And, this happens because, let's face it, we've all been in this situation. Leadership involves making tough decisions. If all decisions were easy, there wouldn't be a huge amount of pay gap for leaders. But maybe this year, the organization needs to focus on managing costs. Something like that. It's understandable. And one of the traits of a good leader is to help the organization focus. My concern, though, is once CX has been deprioritized, I've got an interesting case study I want to cover in just a moment. It can be easy for that choice to become a habit.
Yeah.
Or for a sensible goal, like we just need to sell, to harden into something of a more harmful dogma. And by the time clients start leaving, which is, of course, code for falling revenue, the gap between your company and its competitors may have become significant. And the example I want to pick up on is Wells Fargo in the late 2010s. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this example, but they had, I think it's safe to say, an undue focus on sales. It led to an aggressive culture that created problems with customer trust when employees were found doing things that they shouldn't have done and then got found out. It was a big scandal. It resulted in fines of $3 billion, thousands of lost customers, and a breakdown of trust. And to resolve it, they ended up overhauling their entire sales culture, the topic of this podcast now, and shifting from those aggressive quotas to transparency-driven CX initiatives. Things like real-time transaction alerts, clearer banking policies. So we need to be careful about going overbalancing on these things. The second reason I can think why a leader might deprioritize client experience particularly in the industry I serve, which is the B2B asset management industry. Superior client experience has historically been expensive. It's been white glove service. Yes, sir. No, sir. You tell us what color you want it in, what font we can do, anything you like. That's expensive customization. And that has forced companies to kick CX down the road, to deprioritize it, especially during periods of cost cutting. Linking to Melanie, a point that you were making earlier, we've got an episode coming up about technology. So that's sort of putting a placeholder on that, because today, agentic AI has just changed that dynamic where, CX through AI will now be able to create much more affordable, personalized experiences. So there are reasons why a leader might need to deprioritize CX, but there are risks to actually losing sight of it. So how to finish then, how can they keep CX from slipping out of their sight? I've got 3 tips. One, just the same as Hamish, tie CX to revenue. You mentioned KPIs. So, linking to episode 2, what is CX? Measurable in time and money. Show executives how CX impacts retention, client retention, and growth.
You can only change what you measure, right, Adam? That's the only way it works. If you don't know you don't have any measurements, you can't change anything.
That's right. And when you tie CX to financial performance, it won't get deprioritized. Linking back to Hamish, you were talking about KPIs. If you've got a KPI and it's a sensible, reasonable KPI to be respected, it'll be something you make sure you do before you clock off on a Friday afternoon, right? It will get done.
An analogy on that one actually is in the area of marketing in a lot of financial services where, marketing is quite often seen as the colouring in department in the corner, and how do we make it more mainstream and central, get it taken seriously? And I think one of the mistakes that's often made is if you take somebody like a CFO in an organisation and think of what their language is and what their world is, if you walk in the door and try and talk to them about brand values, they're just not listening. Unless we can translate it into their language, they're not going to listen to us. So I think that exactly as you say, if the language of the business is the revenue line or something on the P&L or whatever, you've got to translate CX into that. Otherwise, nobody's listening to you.
Return of investment.
Yeah.
That's the language to use. With a finance head.
It has to be. Yeah.
And not everybody, people on the front line, they may be less influenced and affected by KPIs. Certainly at the manager level and above, KPI is going to work. So my second reason, and then I'll finish here, or second way that leaders can make sure they keep CX in sight when, understandably, they have other priorities that month or that quarter or that year, is give employees real authority. Set clear guardrails, but let frontline staff fix issues without escalation bottlenecks. In not a small proportion of financial services firms, there are many teams who say, oh, no, we're not allowed to speak to clients. What?
Yeah.
Get on the phone to them right now and solve this before this blows up unnecessarily. Give them the authority, empower them to solve things fast and quickly. Imagine they would and act accordingly.
Can I say I think there's an interesting 2 parts for that almost, aren't there? There's one which is, you've just used the word empowerment, which is give them the authority to actually go and talk to customers. The other bit of authority is something we touched on last episode around the people that are driving CX through the organization in total, giving them the authority, having people that have the authority to actually go out and influence outside their own department and across functionals as well.
It's so important. It really is. Yeah. Well, look, I just want to, if I can, follow up on the leadership point. And I would say that I think that culture is driven by 2 things. One is the leader, but also we in financial services, we love numbers, don't we? So, if you've got a scorecard, a balanced scorecard on your client experience, that always goes a long way. But leadership, I've worked for various different CEOs in various guises. And the CEOs that go and say, I'm going to go meet one client a day, is setting the tone right from the top, right? Yeah. And tells and understands firsthand the stories of clients. I've worked for CEOs who have come from product backgrounds, who've never seen a client in their life before and would be sort of quite nervous to go and see a client. And it does make a difference. It really does. If you have a head of a CEO who is not talking and speaking and setting the example right from the top, it really does. It does change everything in an organization. But I would say that
That
Doesn't
does
matter.
happen. People can come to the top job from different paths.
Yeah.
I think what I would say is it's never too late.
Yeah, it
You know,
is. Yeah, absolutely. You
it's
can always
never
go
too
and visit
late. Hey,
clients.
hey, Mrs. Klein, I'm new. I'm the boss. I'd love
Yeah.
to hear your perspective.
I
Yeah,
lived when I was at
absolutely.
Eurostar, I mean, I was down in London during the week because I live in Edinburgh. So I was down in London, through the week. And quite often I'd get a train across to Paris in an evening and come back the following morning. And I'd spend time literally talking to customers because if you don't get out there and see them, you're not going to. And actually,
Yeah.
the other one about it is you talk about CEO talking to customers, Melanie.
Mm.
Also, the internal customers is just as important in creating that culture. And Colin Marshall was brilliant at that. 6 o'clock in the morning, you'd find him down talking to the baggage ramp people at Heathrow Airport, because
Yeah.
he knew it was as important with his own
Because that's where you
internal
learn
customers as well as
what's
the
really
external.
happening on the ground. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
But if I look at the environments that I've worked in, I would observe there are three types of companies that are on their own journeys. Companies
Mhm.
that are making so much money and doing really well. Those are cultures what I would say kick CX down the road, because why do I need to care? They're making so much
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
There's a second culture whereby it is in trouble and it needs to cut down cost and it needs to do it quickly. And often the things that they focus on are all things cost and make decisions not always with their client experience lens. And it's very much, I would say, intrinsic focused. How do we make ourselves better internally? How do we set ourselves up to be better?
With
got
And the
fear
third,
of, so I was gonna say, with fear of upsetting some of my former colleagues, I would argue that's exactly what happened at British Airways in the last 10 years. Complete
yeah.
focus, complete focus on cost.
Yeah, and then I would say the third environment, and this is a culture. So those first two environments, I would say, are not conducive, or
Yeah.
not that conducive to CX, and our cultures that can create cultures that kick CX down the road. And there's a third type of organization, which is in the mode of, I want to think about new services, new products, and they are in that innovative mindset. And it's often that environment, thinking about going with the energy, with the organization, is often that sort of organization that generates a culture that doesn't kick CX down the road. But I would argue that in all three scenarios, it goes back to what I originally was saying about leadership and measurement. You
Yeah.
can still be in an organization that is managing costs, but if you've got a leader, you're saying, I'm going to meet a client every day, and yet still having that, how we're going to be better set up and organized. It's amazing then when they're thinking about cost and how they're doing it, they're still keeping client in mind. So I would
Yeah.
say that has to transcend and will really create that positive culture. But without that leadership and without having the client experience scorecard and the stuff that Accomplish does and your organization, Adam, does, if they don't bring that right at the top level, then I would say that then you're leaving it to the state of mind that the organization might be in. And either it's in a high growth market or operating very well. Second is just trying to focus on cost cutting, or it's innovation. But innovation is a culture that often creates and looks at improving client experience. That would
Yeah.
be my
Yeah.
summary.
Yeah. No.
I
Agreed.
really liked your three companies there, or your three sort of theoretical
Yeah.
companies. The second one is the interesting one, right?
Mm.
Because I'm a financial services firm right now that isn't in cost cutting mode, So yes, instinctively that may not be conducive to client experience, I think was the word that you used,
Yeah,
but it absolutely does not and should not exclude client experience.
exactly.
I mean,
And it goes from the leadership, from
You
the top
guys have
down.
mentioned have been almost free aspects of good client experience. Speaking to clients costs you nothing, but might
Yeah.
lead to them staying, which is every firm's largest source of revenue. And clients that stay are more prone to buy more.
there's a culture point here, I think, as well, in the way we describe it. I mean, first of all, I've never come across a business that's turned around its business by cutting costs, but that's just another,
Exactly right.
it's the revenue line, But there's a language thing here as well. As soon as you say cost cutting, you're immediately thinking of taking things away. And I know it's semantics, but cost efficiency is actually what you're after. How could we
Yeah.
do the same things more efficiently? That should be the goal, not cost cutting. Because as soon as you get into cost cutting, that's when you start hitting customer experience. You start taking food off airplanes, to produce a random example.
Exactly. Well put, Hamish. Well put. And that's exactly the right mindset to have. So look, I think this is an opportunity for us to wrap up. Thank you all to all our listeners for joining us. We do hope you found this discussion useful and that you'll join us for future episodes. We'd like to hear from you. So if you have any subjects or that you'd like us to debate or discuss, we really would welcome them. including if you'd like to join us as a guest in future episodes, please do share with us directly or write in the comment section. And if I may ask, if you like this episode, please can I ask you to share it now with a colleague or a friend, especially those that you think will benefit from this discussion. Now, in the next episode, what's next in our competitive CX series will be what are the organizational structures that get in the way of CX? That's going to be interesting. And I know, Hamish, you've touched on this in terms of how you've looked at organizing businesses and how that can impact CX. Absolutely. So look, don't miss out, everyone. We're wishing you a good day and hope you too can go and create a competitive CX. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Nice one. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Competitive CX, the podcast dedicated to insights for financial services professionals tackling client experience challenges. We hope you found valuable strategies for enhancing client engagement in your organization.
If you enjoyed the discussion, please subscribe to Competitive CX and leave a rating and a review. Your feedback helps us reach more finance professionals seeking to overcome their CX challenges.
And you can stay up to date with the latest in client experience by following us on LinkedIn for resources designed to help you innovate and improve financial services.
Join us next time as we continue exploring how to transform client experiences in finance. Until then, keep pushing boundaries and striving for excellence in the client experience.